A seemingly ordinary Sunday morning panel program suddenly transformed into a confrontation that would go down in political history. When Representative Jasmine Crockett of Mississippi, live on air, exposed Senator JD Vance's hidden, dirty financial ties and unethical dealings, Vance's familiar smug grin froze. Everyone asked a single question: what was in that folder Crockett held, and what made Vance panic so profoundly in front of the entire nation? This wasn't just a political spat. It was a moment when a politician's mask was ripped away, and truth was confronted in its rawest form. Let's delve into the backstory of this scandal, starting from that Sunday morning, and explore step by step how the incriminating documents came to light, who acted with what intentions, and how this revelation shook American politics. The segment began live from Austin, Texas. The lights were intense, the air almost too still. JD Vance looked comfortable, even smug, his navy blue tie slightly off-center, but he didn't care. He leaned back in his chair like a man used to getting the last word. Across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, calm, still, dressed in a rust-colored blazer that somehow drew focus effortlessly. She listened patiently as Vance launched into his well-rehearsed monologue about campaign finance reform, calling it overhyped noise pushed by left-wing bloggers. He smiled to himself as the anchor chuckled politely, but Crockett didn't laugh. She didn't even blink. When the anchor turned to her, inviting a response, she simply reached into her leather tote and pulled out a slim folder. No theatrics, no smugness, just quiet purpose. She opened it slowly, revealing printed documents marked up with yellow highlighter and handwritten notes in the margins. "Before we go any further," she said evenly, "I think it's important viewers see what we're actually talking about." The camera cut to her hands as she held up the first page, an FEC filing dated February 3rd. It showed a $50,000 donation to a super PAC supporting Vance's latest policy initiative. The donor? A subsidiary of a defense contractor currently under federal investigation. Vance's grin faltered. "That's a public record, sure," he said, waving it off. "But it's got nothing to do with, I'm not finished," Crockett said, flipping to the next page. "This one's from March. Same group, same pattern. And here," she added, holding up a third sheet, "is a leaked email from a lobbyist thanking your office for following through just hours after the bill was introduced." The studio went quiet. Even the anchor, used to smoothing over awkward moments, suddenly looked unsure. "You're quoting hearsay," Vance snapped. "No, I'm quoting you," she said. "It's your aide's email. Same signature. I had it authenticated last week." The anchor's eyes flicked to the producer's booth behind the camera. The live fact-checker team was already digging. Screens lit up, technicians leaned in. In seconds, they confirmed it. The documents were real. "Congresswoman," the anchor said carefully, "are you alleging that Senator Vance is involved in some kind of quid pro quo?" "I'm not alleging," Crockett said, her voice level. "I'm documenting. There's a difference." Vance sat upright now, hands clasped, trying to appear unfazed, but his right leg had started to bounce. The foot that once rested confidently across his knee was now flat on the floor. "You're reaching," he muttered. "This is political theater." But she wasn't performing, she was prosecuting, calmly, efficiently. And for the first time in his career, JD Vance didn't look like the loudest man in the room. What no one on the panel knew yet, not even the anchor, was that the documents Crockett held weren't just random printouts. They were part of a 17-page dossier, and the person who compiled them wasn't a journalist, or a watchdog group. This was a former lobbyist, a man who used to work hand in glove with Vance's team. The camera zoomed slightly on Crockett's face. She hadn't raised her voice once, but her tone, firm, deliberate, felt heavier than any shout. And the viewers at home? They were no longer making coffee or folding laundry. They were locked in, phones buzzing, Twitter, now X, starting to stir. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was something else. But no one, not even Crockett, could have predicted what would be leaked next. The anchor shifted in his chair, clearly uneasy now. "Congresswoman, this is live television. Are you saying you have verified evidence tying Senator Vance's votes to donor activity from companies currently facing federal scrutiny? Jasmine didn't hesitate. Yes. She placed another sheet of paper flat on the table between them. It was an internal memo dated April 7th, 2 days before Vance's controversial amendment to the Industrial Infrastructure Bill. The memo was from the senior vice president of Tredford Energy, a natural gas giant out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. It referenced a scheduled call with Senator Vance's office and a clear expectation. We anticipate positive movement on our pipeline permits following this communication. The anchor's jaw clenched, but he kept going. And you're saying this company made a donation around that time? Not one, Jasmine answered. 3. All split between the senator's affiliated committees, each just under the individual reporting threshold. She tapped the pages like they were cards in a poker game. One on the 8th, one on the 11th, one the day after the bill passed out of committee. Vance leaned forward now, his voice tightening. Let's be very clear, these are accusations without legal standing. My office speaks to stakeholders all the time, Democrat and Republican alike. Except, Jasmine said, flipping to yet another page, this email wasn't addressed to your policy advisor. It was addressed to you. And it included a follow-up line thanking you directly for your discretion and resolve. The studio felt different now, no more polite air of TV civility. It was as if every light in the room had become just a bit sharper. I don't know where you got this garbage, Vance said, his voice rising. But throwing dirt on television doesn't make it true. It's not dirt, Jasmine replied, still steady. It's documentation. We get to call it that when things are written down, Senator. The anchor's earpiece crackled. He raised a finger. Suddenly, we're getting confirmation that the email she's referencing has indeed been cross-verified with public metadata. The domain matches one tied to Tredford Energy's secure internal network. The producer motioned for a screen cut, but it was too late. Viewers had already seen the real-time fact-check pop up. Vance's expression hardened. No more casual confidence, just calculation now, trying to figure out where the next hit might come from. At home, phones were lighting up. Reddit threads were forming. Facebook pages that had never mentioned campaign finance reform were sharing links to the clip. A user on X posted a close-up freeze frame of Vance's face mid-reaction with the caption, "That moment you realize she brought receipts." It started gaining thousands of reposts within minutes. Jasmine, unbothered by the storm she was unleashing, kept her voice calm. People at home don't need to know everything about lobbying to know when something stinks. A vote gets cast, a donor gets a benefit, a thank you email lands. It doesn't take a lawyer to read that. Vance shook his head. You're smearing me in public for political points. You have no case. Then sue me, she said flatly. If it's false, take me to court. Silence. The anchor blinked. The entire segment is now trending live on X, and I'm being told it is the #1 trending topic in the entire country. You're willing to testify under oath about all this? Absolutely, Jasmine said. And I'm willing to release the rest of the documents to the House Ethics Committee, along with a sworn affidavit from the source who gave them to me. Now, it wasn't just Vance who looked nervous. The show's legal team would be reviewing this segment for days. But Crockett knew the risk. She hadn't come in to throw accusations, she had come to set the stage. At that moment, she pulled out a flash drive from her jacket pocket. She slid it across the table, not to Vance, but to the anchor. There's a full copy of the communications, names, dates, internal calendar logs, and a notarized letter from the source. Vance reached for his water. His hands weren't steady. The anchor's voice dropped an octave. We weren't expecting this today. Neither was I, Jasmine said. But silence helps no one. The control room was in chaos. Producers spoke over each other. The network's legal counsel was texting the executive producer. They had just broadcast something that might change the trajectory of an active legislator's career, and Crockett hadn't even reached her final point. But just when the audience thought it couldn't get more personal, it did. Before anyone ever questioned JD Vance's ethics, he was seen as the polished Midwestern underdog who beat the odds. Born in Middletown, Ohio, raised by a single mother with more stories than structure, he spun his past into political gold. His memoir catapulted him into national attention, and by the time he ran for Senate, he had already become a brand. People liked him because he spoke plainly. At least that's what they thought. He wore jeans to town halls, shared war stories about surviving poverty, and positioned himself as a man of the people. But once elected, something shifted. He stopped showing up at some of the smaller community centers. His once open office hours in places like Zanesville and Marietta slowly vanished from the calendar. And the lobbyists came in. They didn't come through the front door, they didn't have to. They had lunch meetings, golf fundraisers in Scottsdale, and whisper sessions in Georgetown townhouses with no cameras, no reporters, and no paper trail, until someone left a trail anyway. To understand how Crockett's dossier even existed, you had to know about the man Vance had trusted too much, Patrick Healy. Not a politician, not a household name, just a quiet, efficient operator who ran logistics for a DC-based lobbying firm that handled everything from agriculture to oil. Patrick worked behind the scenes, coordinating talking points, drafting sample amendments, and scheduling discreet meetings between lawmakers and industry partners. Healy had been close to Vance's office for nearly 2 years, close enough to know which calls got returned and which concerns led to campaign bundles. He didn't talk much at staff mixers, didn't show up in holiday photos, but he was always there, watching. Then one day, something broke. It wasn't a scandal, it wasn't blackmail. It was a phone call. Patrick's younger sister, a nurse in Decatur, Alabama, had been laid off after her rural hospital shut down. The closure came just weeks after a policy change gutted federal funding for low-volume medical centers, a policy pushed through a subcommittee Vance had voted on seemingly without fanfare. She called her brother in tears. Patrick didn't say much at the time, but something stuck. It gnawed at him. He had been part of this machine for years, but now someone he loved was bleeding from the gears. The next morning, he started printing emails, carefully, selectively. Then he went dark. He didn't go to the media. He didn't post online. He contacted an aide in Crockett's office, a quiet man named Rami, who had once worked on consumer protection cases. Rami vetted the documents for 2 weeks before even looping in Jasmine. And when he did, she didn't go to the press either. She sat with it. She didn't want a headline, she wanted the truth to hold. So she built her case piece by piece, night after night. She called in lawyers, ethics advisors, even a former federal prosecutor to quietly assess the legal weight of the material. It wasn't slam-dunk illegal, but it smelled bad. Real bad. Vance had always been good at shaping perception. He tweeted about working-class struggle while rubbing elbows with hedge fund executives. He cried foul about big government yet took contributions from data firms bidding on public contracts. And somehow, nobody had stopped him, until now. The image of the self-made man had started to peel at the edges, revealing a politician who had learned quickly that sincerity didn't win re-election, funding did. Crockett knew she was walking a thin line. Accusing a fellow member of Congress on live television wasn't just risky. It was potentially career-ending if she got even one detail wrong. But she hadn't rushed. She had prepared. And Patrick Healy? He vanished after the dossier was sent. His name was never mentioned on the broadcast, not once. But without him, the entire stack of evidence would have stayed hidden in archived email threads and encrypted drives. Crockett hadn't just caught a senator flatfoot. She had exposed the system he counted on staying hidden until someone who helped build it turned against him. But Crockett wasn't done yet, because the whistleblower hadn't told her everything, not yet. Patrick Healy hadn't been in the spotlight a day in his life. He wore brown shoes that were always clean and jackets that never quite fit right. He didn't make eye contact in elevators. He kept receipts for everything and filed emails with obsessive detail. He wasn't a hero. At least that's not how he saw himself. He joined the lobbying firm Kelly Son Byron in 2017 after a short stint in state government. He thought the work would be boring, logistics, scheduling, research, but it paid well, And he liked the feeling of being in the room, even if he was just the guy passing out the handouts. Within a year, he was managing outreach for the firm's strategic partnerships, which really meant keeping elected officials close and quiet. Patrick watched how the game was played. The firm had a way of making politicians feel important without ever letting them forget who held the purse strings. Dinner meetings turned into retreats. Retreats turned into private jet rides. The deeper the loyalty, the bigger the checks. And JD Vance? He didn't ask too many questions. Patrick wasn't shocked when the firm latched onto Vance. He had the right story, working class, book smart, willing to toe the line when needed. But what started as meetings about common goals soon turned into what Patrick called prearranged gratitude. There was one moment Patrick never forgot. It was a Friday afternoon in March. He was asked to book a last-minute car service for a lobbyist flying into Columbus to deliver a policy packet directly to Vance's team. The document included detailed suggestions for tweaking a new infrastructure bill, minor changes, but with major implications for a certain natural gas firm. That Monday, Vance's staff emailed back their approval. By Wednesday, the edits were introduced on the Senate floor. And by Thursday, the firm's executives were celebrating with a wine-soaked dinner in D.C. Patrick filed the emails. He kept screenshots. He saved calendar invites, not because he planned to use them, but because something about it felt too easy, too smooth. Then came his sister's call. When Kara told him that her rural hospital was shutting down, it didn't click right away. He listened. He offered to send money. He promised to visit. But later that night, he found himself staring at one of the same memos he'd helped circulate, a policy brief about rationalizing rural health expenditures. He read it twice, his mouth dry. One of the amendments he'd helped push through had cut funding to low-population facilities, exactly the kind his sister worked at. He had helped write the memo. He hadn't even realized. That night, he pulled his external drive out of the desk. He started copying files. He didn't know what he was going to do with them, not yet. But for the first time in his life, he felt sick to his stomach about the job he'd taken. The turning point came 2 weeks later, when his firm asked him to draft a talking point sheet for Vance's appearance at a private breakfast with oil execs in Fort Worth. The bullet points were full of vague euphemisms. Maintaining energy independence, reaffirming industry commitments, ensuring policy continuity. Patrick had written 100 of these before, but this time he couldn't do it. He faked a stomach bug, left the office early, and went home. That weekend, he reached out to someone he'd met years earlier at a government ethics seminar, Rami, now a policy advisor in Crockett's office. Patrick's first message was short. "You don't know me, but I think I have something your boss needs to see." Rami was cautious. He asked questions. He didn't make promises. But after a few days he met Patrick in a quiet library corner in Baltimore. No cameras, no wires, just two men with folders between them. Patrick laid out the basics. Vance's not just what Vance had accepted, but how the firm had guided him step by step through a donor-funded roadmap to legislative success. What shocked Rami most wasn't the corruption, it was how routine it all sounded. No backroom deals, no shady cash, just emails, invoices, and thank you notes written like dinner RSVPs. Patrick didn't want anything, no payout, no media attention. All he asked was that his name be kept out of it. He didn't even care if Crockett ever used the documents, he just didn't want to be a part of it anymore. Rami brought the files to Jasmine. She spent nights reading every page, not just once, twice, 3 times. When she asked herself if it was enough to go public, she remembered something Patrick had said at the end of their meeting. "I didn't blow a whistle. I just stopped plugging my ears." But as Crockett prepared to go live, Patrick sent one final message, and it changed everything she thought she knew about the case. When the final email came in from Patrick, it was past midnight. Jasmine Crockett had been sitting on her living room floor, stacks of paper surrounding her, highlighter ink staining the sleeve of her sweatshirt. She hadn't slept properly in days, and when the notification chimed on her laptop, she almost ignored it. But the subject line read, "One more thing." The attachment was a voice memo, short, just under 2 minutes. In it, Patrick sounded tired. His voice was quiet, steady, but worn out. "I didn't mention this before because I didn't want to complicate your decision," he said. "But a month ago the firm started scrubbing call logs. They knew a story was coming. Someone tipped them off. Vance's internal records tied to Vance's calendar were deleted, including calls that came in just before key votes. But I kept copies. You'll find them in the folder I sent tonight." Jasmine clicked the link. A spreadsheet opened, dozens of entries, times, dates, contact names, all matching perfectly with the votes she had flagged. She leaned back against her couch, staring at the ceiling. The room was silent, but her mind was a storm. She knew the weight of what she was sitting on. She also knew the rules. If she made this public without airtight verification, she'd be labeled reckless. If she waited too long, someone else would bury it. And if she got even one thing wrong, the media would spin it into a smear campaign. So she took the hardest route, the long, slow, careful one. She contacted a small circle of advisors, people she trusted with more than just strategy, a retired prosecutor, a campaign ethics lawyer, her mentor from her time in civil rights litigation. They weren't just sounding boards, they were her compass. One of them asked bluntly, "Do you want to win a news cycle, or do you want to change something?" That question stuck with her, because she didn't want a viral clip that people forgot about a week later. She wanted accountability. She wanted sunlight. For 2 weeks, she worked in near silence. No leaks, no interviews, just fact-checking and long phone calls. She read and reread every page Patrick had given her. She mapped out timelines, double-checked filings, matched donor names to legislation. The deeper she went, the more surgical the pattern became. This wasn't just negligence. It was a system, a precise, predictable cycle of influence. She ran mock interviews with her comms director. She practiced her delivery in front of a blank wall. She changed the order of her talking points until each sentence landed exactly where she wanted. And when her team suggested she go through the usual channels, press release, private inquiry, she shook her head. "This isn't something I want buried in committee," she said. "I want people to hear it as it is, not how it's spun." Her team hesitated, not because they didn't believe her, but because they knew the blowback would come fast. "You'll make enemies," her chief of staff warned. "I already have," she replied. The night before the panel, she barely spoke to anyone. She turned off her phone. She sat at her kitchen table with her folder and a cup of strong black coffee, thinking not about JD Vance, but about the voters who put her in office, the single mom in Little Rock who sent her a handwritten letter about losing her job, the veteran in Shreveport who said lobbyists had more access than he ever did, the college student in Milwaukee who asked why people like her even bother running. They were the ones she carried in her thoughts as she walked into the studio that Sunday morning, not the press, not the party, the people. Her staff offered her last-minute notes in the green room. She didn't take them. She already knew what she needed to say. And when the host asked if she was ready to go on air, she nodded once. "Let's get to it." She wasn't there to play by the rules, she was there to challenge them. But when the segment started, she hadn't expected one particular viewer to be watching and texting screenshots before the show had even ended. It was 9 a.m. when the segment really tipped, not just in tone but in trajectory. JD Vance was sweating. It started with a simple question from the anchor. "Senator, do you deny that your office received these emails directly from lobbying entities tied to companies under federal investigation?" Vance didn't answer immediately. He stared at the anchor, then at Crockett, then at the folder of papers that now seemed radioactive on the table between them. For the first time since sitting down, he looked unsure of which camera to face. "I deny that my office did anything illegal," he said, voice clipped. "But she's not just accusing you of illegality," the anchor pressed. "She's showing a pattern, financial, procedural, and personal." "That's your interpretation," Vance snapped. "Actually," Jasmine interjected, "it's the public's. I've had over 700 messages since the show started, and that's just on one platform." The anchor blinked. Wait, are you saying people are messaging you live during this? I'm saying they're watching, she said, holding up her phone. And they're not confused. That's when Vance snapped. Let's be honest, this is nothing but a stunt, he said, his voice rising. Congresswoman Crockett wants to be famous, and she thinks using my name will make her a star. She's building a campaign off lies and out-of-context screenshots. Call it lies then, she said. On the record. I just did, he replied. She tilted her head. Good. Because slander laws go both ways, Senator. It was a tense exchange, but what made it remarkable was what happened next. The anchor's screen lit up with live viewer reactions. The network had launched a rolling poll, unplanned, reactive, and raw. Do you believe the documents presented by Congresswoman Crockett are credible? Within 3 minutes, 68% of viewers clicked yes. The control room didn't cut away. They let the numbers roll on screen, live, right under Vance's face. And then came the breaking moment. A production assistant off-camera whispered something to the anchor, who adjusted his earpiece and turned slightly, squinting. I'm being told we've just received a clip, an audio recording that confirms part of the timeline Congresswoman Crockett shared earlier. JD froze. The anchor continued. It's a voicemail from a Tredford Energy executive thanking a legislative aide for walking the senator through the finer points of the revised amendment. We're vetting the source, but no! Vance said loudly, cutting him off. You're running with gossip now. This isn't journalism, it's a hit piece. You said yourself this was all out of context, Crockett replied. The context just arrived. Vance looked around. He reached for his water again, but his hand hovered midair, unsure. In the background, the network began rolling a still image from the voicemail source, the date, the numbers, the audio clip's transcription, clear, damning language. And with it, the shift happened, not in the room, but across the country. People watching from Sacramento to Pensacola were no longer seeing a political debate. They were watching someone caught, not by the police, not in a courtroom, but by facts, evidence, and the inability to pivot fast enough. On social media, the moment blew open. The hashtag #VanceExposed started trending. By 10 a.m., major political commentators, both left and right, had picked it up. Crockett didn't raise her voice once, one post read. She just walked him straight into the truth. Memes followed, freeze frames of Vance's reaction to the voicemail, side-by-side screenshots of the documents. A TikTok edit with dramatic music was posted by a 17-year-old in Fresno and hit 1 million views in under an hour. But the bigger waves were happening offline. Calls were going out inside Capitol offices. Senate staffers were already reviewing legislative calendars. Reporters were huddled in newsrooms with headphones, replaying every clip they could get their hands on. And Vance's press team? Silent. Phones on Do Not Disturb. No tweets, no statements, just a thick, panicked quiet. Back in the studio, the anchor finally said, "We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll be joined by a legal analyst to provide some context." Vance pushed back his chair, clearly ready to walk off set. But Jasmine didn't even move. She simply leaned forward and said quietly, "You built your brand on being real. So let's be real." But while Vance scrambled for damage control, the most unexpected voice would soon enter the conversation, and she had a message that couldn't be ignored. The moment they cut to commercial, JD Vance walked off set, not storming out, but moving fast, his phone already to his ear. His team wasn't answering. Texts weren't being read. He pushed through the side hallway of the studio, past interns and assistants, trying not to look rattled. Backstage, his communications director, Simon Larry, stood near the water cooler, clutching a tablet. His face was pale. He didn't say hello. "We're trending in 7 states," Simon muttered, not looking up. "And not in a good way. Pull the plug on all comments. Lock everything down," Vance barked. "I want the official account offline in 5 minutes." Simon hesitated. "You sure about that? Going dark makes it look worse." It is worse if we start talking and say something wrong, Vance snapped. He wasn't wrong. One misstep now could set off a second wave, and it wasn't just about optics anymore. It was about survival. Meanwhile, inside the studio, Jasmine Crockett remained seated, sipping from her water bottle. She had her folder closed now, hands resting calmly in her lap. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't gloating. But she was watching. As the break ended, the network returned with a legal analyst via satellite from Phoenix, Melinda Drury, a former DOJ ethics investigator. Her tone was measured but firm. If these documents hold up, and it appears they are, what we're looking at is not a criminal indictment yet, but serious ethical exposure. The Senate's Internal Ethics Panel would likely open a review, and depending on what's in those calendar records, it could grow legs beyond just congressional oversight. Back in Vance's green room, the senator watched silently as Drury continued. Campaign finance violations aren't always about direct money for vote exchanges. Sometimes it's about influence that becomes habit. The key here is pattern. If there's a pattern, and the emails match legislative movement, that's actionable. Vance turned away from the screen. He muttered to Simon, "We need to hit back. Discredit the whistleblower." "Problem is," Simon said, "we don't know who it is. Crockett never named him. She played it tight." Vance stared at the floor. "Find out. If we can't go after her directly, we go after whoever fed her." But in the hours that followed, finding a single leak in Crockett's operation proved nearly impossible. Her staff didn't leak. The documents were under secure lock. No names had been mentioned publicly. And Patrick Healy had vanished like he never existed. Meanwhile, political allies who had stood next to Vance at fundraisers started going silent. A senator from Oklahoma postponed a planned joint town hall. A PAC in St. Louis pulled a scheduled ad by. His inbox, once flooded with "attaboys," now sat eerily still. Even his oldest ally in Cincinnati, Representative Carl Denning, called him personally. "I just got out of a breakfast with donors. They're jumpy," Denning said. "You need to clean this up fast." "I'm trying." "Then try harder. Because no one's going to bleed for you, JD. Not if this keeps burning." Meanwhile, inside Crockett's office, phones were ringing nonstop. Her staff scrambled to keep up with interview requests, verification follow-ups, and thank you messages from voters across the country. She turned most of them down. No late-night shows, no podcasts, not yet. "This isn't about media," she told Rami. "This is about accountability. Let the facts speak first." Rami looked up from his laptop. "People are calling you a hero." "Heroes don't have folders," she said flatly. "They have instincts. I had paperwork. That's all." By mid-afternoon, news outlets were running split-screen coverage, JD Vance dodging press questions outside a closed-door meeting, and Crockett walking calmly through Capitol Hill, answering questions without breaking stride. One clip of her answering a reporter went viral. "Do you believe this will end his career?" the journalist asked. "I don't care about his career," she answered. "I care about the people who trusted us to tell the truth." But the truth was still unraveling, because while Vance scrambled to plug leaks and craft denials, a new email had just landed in Crockett's inbox. This one from a name she didn't recognize, but with a subject that made her breath catch. "You missed something." And what came next would force Jasmine to make a decision she wasn't ready for, not in public, and not on camera. By Monday morning, the moment had already become a national flashpoint. Jasmine Crockett's clip was on every platform, edited, reposted, shared by teenagers in debate clubs and retirees who rarely touched social media. Some had trimmed the segment to just her most pointed exchange. "Then sue me." Others kept the full 6-minute stretch, watching Vance's composure crumble in real time. Cable networks ran looping highlights. Morning radio dissected every pause and inflection. Even a few late-night comedians tried to turn it into punchlines, though most admitted there wasn't much to joke about. It wasn't just a gotcha moment, it was accountability in real time, delivered without theatrics. Jasmine didn't do a press tour. She issued a short statement from her office. My duty is to the people I serve. The documents speak for themselves. Still, the effect was immediate. Within 48 hours, donations to her campaign fund quadrupled. She was invited to speak at ethics conferences. A civil rights museum in Kansas City called to ask if they could archive the original folder from the broadcast. But she kept her focus locked on what mattered, the investigation behind the scenes. Her team worked around the clock. They organized every file into a clean timeline. They met with 2 attorneys who agreed to review the documents independently. The goal wasn't to trend, it was to hold. And then came the second email. Subject line: You missed something. Sender: no name, just an encrypted address. Inside, a file titled Midterm Meeting Audio.pdf. Attached to it, a transcript. Jasmine called Rami in immediately. He scanned it, eyebrows tightening with every line. It detailed a private meeting from the previous October, midterm season, where Vance allegedly sat with executives from an agricultural conglomerate known for major environmental violations. The transcript was short, but damning. The group discussed revisions to a pending clean water bill. In exchange, the executives offered media insulation, a term Crockett had never seen used in that context. You think this is legit? Rami asked. This event not only marked a turning point in JD Vance's career but also brought the lobbying and campaign finance relationships in Washington under scrutiny once again. Jasmine Crockett's courage and meticulousness highlighted the public's demand for transparency and accountability from politicians.